Make sure that you are on time, wearing a mask, and bring a charged laptop so that you may complete your academic work. If you have any questions, please see Mr. Harden. Next week is our Hollywood Homecoming, a red carpet affair. Monday is Mean Monday. Tuesday is Twin Tuesday. Wednesday is Class Cuddle Wednesday with 9th grade green, 10th grade blue, 11th yellow, and 12th red. With a parade at 6:30. Thursday is Thrift Store Thursday and a door decor contest. Friday is Fat Friday in Mums with a virtual pep rally at 3:45. Grades 9 through 11 and all staff retakes are on October 19th during lunches, only in the Charmer Gym. Go to the Charmer Gym and have your photo taken. If you need it done during your lunch, tell them you're there for retakes. Seniors, the last chance for you to have your senior portrait taken is October 19th. Glamour Craft will be there all day taking senior portraits in the Charmer Gym. Talk to Ms. Lee at 303 to make an appointment. Appointments are free. This is Miranda. This is Sam. Have a Rangerific Friday.
Rangerific Friday. It's going to be a Rangerific Friday. Today's going to be a good day. Today we're just going to go over some of the stuff that you read yesterday, that you talked about yesterday. Got a few questions for you. Probably won't do all the discussion questions I had planned just to kind of conserve some time because there is a decent amount to go through. But basically today we're mainly just looking at maps. Okay, we're looking at very similar maps to the ones that I handed you out yesterday. Lots of really good information on these maps. So as far as notes go, if I mention something you don't have down, jot it down. But other than that, just kind of pay attention and reflect on what you guys have already read, what you have already discussed. Today it's mainly maps. I do have 4 different video clips. They're all pretty short. I think 3 of them are 5 minutes or less. The other one is about 9-10 minutes. But again, lots of great information shared. And hopefully between, your reading and your note taking and your discussions yesterday and us kind of coming all together about this today, hopefully we can pretty much wrap a bow around Unit 2 Networks of Exchange. Next week, the last of the new material that we need to get into is the Mongol Empire, very much involved in trade, specifically Silk Road trade. We'll talk about them a little bit today, kind of preview where they were and a little bit about why they were successful. But we're going to spend Monday and Tuesday just on them. I think you guys will find them interesting. On one hand, just did terrible things. But on the other hand, did some things that turned out to be pretty good in the long run. So it's an interesting sort of paradox. We'll get into that next week. On Wednesday, we are going to review. We'll talk about Unit 1 stuff, Unit 2 stuff. You will have a test review this time around. That'll probably be available on Monday. You'll be able to work on some of it in class on Wednesday, though, because some of it we're going to do together. And then on Thursday, Unit 1 and 2 District Common Assessment, our first actual test. I'll get into the time limit and the exact number of questions a little bit later. I am still kind of tweaking it. But, it's going to be a time test. It's going to be one that if you're here, you're going to do while you're in class. But if you study for it, I don't think that you're going to have any problems on it. Hopefully, this is something you can use to kind of boost up your grade. Other things grade-wise, there's those 4 assignments that I'm not going to accept after today. Those first 4 assignments, just kind of keep that in mind. If you're missing them, get them to me as soon as you can. The essay that was due on Wednesday, that was a test grade. If you haven't turned it in yet, please get that done as soon as possible. I'm almost finished grading them. I should either tonight or tomorrow. Those grades will show up if they're not in there already, so just kind of monitor that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, there's also the Unit 1 quiz on AP Classroom. Remember, it could be worth some extra credit, but you do need to do it on time. So short of that, let's go ahead and get started. But of course, I always forget one last thing, AP exam payment. We need your money, or we don't. The College Board needs your money. You will pay for this on total registration. That second site you went to and had to fill out all the stuff, that is where you're going to submit your payment. If you're eligible for a fee reduction, I think the total is only $25, but for everyone else, the initial down payment is $44. You'll make the rest of it to total up $90 in February. But yeah, that's coming due. That's due at the end of the month. So please, make that a priority, get it squared away. You're gonna be in here. You're gonna be writing essays. You're gonna be operating under time limits. That's just what the class is like. You might as well have the benefit of potentially getting college credit because we're gonna get you ready for it every day. We're getting ready for it. You just may not always realize it. So earlier in the week, you were assigned one of these trade routes. You were supposed to read the chapter. You were supposed to summarize the 2 sections in it. There was also some vocab that you were supposed to do. When I check your notebook for this stuff, I need to see all of it for your assigned chapter. But then for the other 2, I need to see at least some semblance of note taking, indicating that you talked about it, or if you weren't here, that you at least read it and thought about it. The first map we're going to show you is right here. Now, this is the same map from yesterday. And I think larger and in color, it makes a little bit more sense. But I do have a question for you. And this is, kind of the essential question. During this time period, 1200 to 1450, all 3 of these big trade networks had been around at this point for years and years. But it's during this time period, more so than any other, that you just see the volume of trade expand exponentially. So my question for you, and this could be true of any of the trade routes, who can give me one reason why? Why is more trade happening? Why are more people connected during this time period than maybe in periods prior to this? I swear I'm not stretching. I'm trying to motivate somebody to raise their hand because they just gets awkward. You were awesome. Espinoza, tell me.
There's more technological innovations that make it easier to travel places.
Can you give me one example?
Well, I like the camels, like the saddles.
Boom. Okay? Because wheels been around for a while. But technology in general, transportation technology, it's getting better. Okay, for camels, which obviously you're going to have to use in arid conditions like, the trans-Saharan routes or even some of these Central Asian routes. Camels are vengeful, hateful animals. Like they carry grudges from my understanding. They're not fun to deal with, but they retain water and they can haul a decent amount of weight. So, traders had to learn not only how to deal with these animals, had to design a variety of saddles that would allow them to sit on top of these camels and steer them to some extent in a comfortable way. That's over land trade, but just think about all the stuff that's going on in the Indian Ocean that's maybe letting maritime, trade really flourish. Who can tell me a good example of a technology that's starting to be more widely used during this time period that makes maritime trade, oceanic trade, a little bit more feasible? And this is something you guys know. You're just shy in its second period, and it's still early. And I get it, but we're all in the same boat. Tell you what, you participate right now. I'll chill out on the questions here in a minute. We'll just do maybe 3 or 4 more, and then we'll be done. I saw that hand up. Jones, what do you got? Lateen sails. That would work. Okay, triangular sails, okay? Better at cutting against the wind, catching wind from a variety of directions. Who can give me one more? Wait a minute. Okay, now I'm looking this way. Wait a minute. Now I'm going that way. I wonder what is that way called? Cup it.
The stern rudder.
It's not what I was thinking, but yes, that's a great example. I could steer my boat any of those ways. But think about basic directions. Right here, the compass. Guys, technology is making things easier. Better ship designs. They talk about the Chinese junk, very, very big, can carry a lot of commodities. The Islamic dhow from the Middle East, very quick ship, but could also carry a bunch of stuff. You look at the astrolabe, something that had been around for many, many years. But just think about events in general. With the Crusades, okay, Europe had been isolated. Now, by the time we get to the 1200s, they're linked in. You may have read about the Mongols, who we're going to talk about here soon. But guys, I'll show you a map later, but there's a point in history where the Mongols control almost the entirety of the Silk Road. You got to think about the benefits there. Now you got one government in charge, one set of laws for traders to adhere to, one set of taxes for traders to have to pay instead of having to go through 10 different kingdoms and have to pay 10 different taxes. Plus, one of the things that's, historically dangerous for trade is people will rob you and steal your stuff. Nobody was robbing anybody on the Silk Road with the Mongols in charge, because the Mongols were very, very mean. That's about the best way I can say it. We'll get into it later, but everybody was scared to death of the Mongols. And if they were the ones protecting the Silk Road, because they wanted the trade, because that's going to make them money, nobody was going to do anything. Nobody was going to rob them. So you've got that going on. You got better financial instruments, paper money, bills of exchange, banks, things that really hadn't been that popular anymore, or up to that point. Now they're becoming more widespread. And again, it just kind of facilitates trade. Now, one thing I am going to ask, and you can kind of look up here, but this is something we've talked about before. Think about the sort of goods that you read about, regardless of the trade route you had: Silk Road, Indian Ocean, Trans-Saharan. If you had to kind of categorize most of these goods into like a type of good, what would it be? What sort of stuff is getting traded the most? Don't make Jones answer them all. Come on, guys. Right here.
Like things that they never had needed,
Check you out, Bradley. Luxury goods. We've said it before, but if you don't have that down, luxury goods really drive most of the trade that we see during this time period. The Silk Road. It's called the Silk Road because people wanted silk. A bunch of other stuff was traded as well, but guys, those are some of the things. Now, at the bottom of all these slides, these maps, I stole them from this Freemanpedia site. It's one of those sites that I put under resources. There's all sorts of good stuff to remember. Along the Silk Road, some of the major trade cities, trade hubs. We'll look at those on the next slide when we have just the Silk Road slide. But they talk about some of the things that are moving, some of the stuff that was on purpose, like, basic things like, luxury goods. Some of the stuff that maybe was traded not on purpose, like diseases, like technology, gunpowder. The Mongols used gunpowder that they stole from the Chinese, and they moved across Asia with it, and that sort of technology kept moving west as well. Paper technology. Again, lots of really good stuff, that you're going to need to know. The good thing is on the following slides, we'll get into each one of these in a little bit more detail. So the Silk Road, really, really important. It's kind of the original trans-regional, transcontinental trade network in the old world. One of the things that you guys read about the other day was trade cities, specifically new ones like Samarkand and Kashgar. But you got to understand, there's all these huge cities that kind of link together to form this network. You start in the east with places like Beijing and Hangzhou. Hangzhou kind of being the easternmost end of the circle. And then you travel throughout Asia. Places like Kashgar and Samarkand. These are cities that developed, because they were just kind of in the ideal spot that trade was already flowing through, but also B, there were areas with rivers, areas that could sustain populations. You keep moving along, the trade network continues to places like Baghdad, Jerusalem, Cairo, in the westernmost area of the Silk Road, Constantinople. Again, these cities are really important. Traders can go there, they can resupply, but it's also just trade hubs and hubs of cultural diffusion in and of themselves. Again, you're usually not talking about a Chinese merchant loading up the wagon and traveling all the way to Constantinople. No, these goods go through countless middlemen who buy it and sell it for more later on. But that's a good thing. It's a good thing because it's what causes so many people to be involved, so much connections to be made. And again, this is how stuff historically spreads. And you see a lot of examples here. The spread of religion along the Silk Road. We've actually talked about that before. Buddhism further into East Asia. Today you look at China, you look at Korea, you look at Japan, very popular belief system. Hinduism doesn't spread as far, mainly localized in the Indian subcontinent, but you do see some connections here in Southeast Asia. Islam, guys, it is the Muslim merchants that are really kind of facilitating a lot of trade during this time period. And especially when we get into Indian Ocean trade and Trans-Saharan trade, those are the main types of people that are really kind of, being active and traveling all over and just kind of, not only trading, but also in the process, spreading their faith. You get the spread of technology. The astrolabe starts here in the West, maybe in the Middle East, maybe in ancient Greece. There's a lot of debate. But that sort of technology, which helps you navigate by using the stars, it starts to spread further to the east, whereas the compass spreads further to the west. Both of them are going to be integral to more and more people traveling by sea. We already talked about gunpowder moving from east to west, but so did paper. We had said that the Abbasid Caliphate years earlier had learned about paper making from the Tang Dynasty. And by the time we get to this point, they're making books. They've improved on the process, and that process starts to spread along with it. But sometimes it's things that you don't think about, like the plague. Sometimes it's things like language. I mean, there are numerous consequences anytime that we deal with groups of people in distant areas connecting and interacting more than ever before. Now, we're going to get into the Mongols themselves Monday and Tuesday, but just look at this empire. And I think I told you to write this down once before. I'm probably going to tell you again, so if you want to wait, that's fine. You're looking at the largest contiguous empire in all of human history. That is almost the entirety of Asia. And they're not really showing Russia on there, but they ruled over the early Russian city-states through a tributary relationship. So we could theoretically kind of include everything to the north as well. But even when you just look at it like this, that is huge. And they built that empire in about a little bit over 100 years, very, very quickly. Now, we'll talk about the fact that the Mongols were savages. We're talking about the wholesale slaughter of millions and millions and millions of people. It is astonishing how many people they killed. But once they gained control of this territory for a while, lots of stability, lots of peace, and a thriving more than ever before trade network along the Silk Road. For all the reasons that we said earlier, lower taxes, one set of laws, safety, which you really hadn't had before. Again, the Silk Road's kind of the start because it comes earlier than those other ones. And this is really kind of truly the very beginnings of what eventually we'll call globalization later on. Granted, obviously a lot of the world's missing, but this is the first real trans-regional, trans-continental trade network that really kind of connected east all the way west. So our first video today, it's over the Silk Road. It's a little 10-minute video, it's only 5 minutes, but I think it gives you a sense of just what an enormous, historical event this was. I'm telling you, the Silk Road trade, all these trade networks, they changed the world forever. The video clips we're watching today are on campus.
To his colleagues in Hong Kong in less than a second. With a single click, a customer in New York orders electronics made in Beijing, transported across the ocean within days by cargo plane or container ship. The speed and volume at which goods and information move across the world today is unprecedented in history. But global exchange itself is older than we think, reaching back over 2,000 years along a 5,000-mile stretch known as the Silk Road. The Silk Road wasn't actually a single road, but a network of multiple routes that gradually emerged over centuries, connecting to various settlements and to each other, thread by thread. The first agricultural civilizations were isolated places in fertile river valleys, their travel impeded by surrounding geography and fear of the unknown. But as they grew, they found that the arid deserts and steppes on their borders were inhabited not by the demons of folklore, but nomadic tribes on horseback. The Scythians, who ranged from Hungary to Mongolia, had come in contact with the civilizations of Greece, Egypt, India, and China. These encounters were often peaceful. But even through raids and warfare, as well as trade and protection of traveling merchants in exchange for tariffs, the nomads began to spread goods, ideas, and technologies between cultures with no direct contact. One of the most important strands of this growing web was the Persian Royal Road, completed by Darius I in the 5th century BCE. Stretching nearly 2,000 miles from the Tigris River to the Aegean Sea, its regular relay points allowed goods and messages to travel in nearly 1/10 the time it would take a single traveler. With Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia and expansion into Central Asia through capturing cities like Samarkand and establishing new ones like Alexandria Eshat, the network of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian culture and trade extended farther east than ever before, laying the foundations for a bridge between China and the West. This was realized in the 2nd century BCE when an ambassador named Shang Qian, sent to negotiate with nomads in the West, returned to the Han Emperor with tales of sophisticated civilizations, prosperous trade, and exotic goods beyond the western borders. Ambassadors and merchants were sent towards Persia and India to trade silk and jade for horses and cotton, along with armies to secure their passage. Eastern and Western routes gradually linked together into an integrated system spanning Eurasia, enabling cultural and commercial exchange farther than ever before. Chinese goods made their way to Rome, causing an outflow of gold that led to a ban on silk, while Roman glassware was highly prized in China. Military expeditions in Central Asia also saw encounters between Chinese and Roman soldiers, possibly even transmitting crossbow technology to the Western world. Demand for exotic and foreign goods and the profits they brought kept the strands of the Silk Road intact, even as the Roman Empire disintegrated and Chinese dynasties rose and fell. Even Mongolian hordes, known for pillage and plunder, actively protected the trade routes rather than disrupting them. But along with commodities, these routes also enabled the movement of traditions, innovations, ideologies, and languages. Originating in India, Buddhism migrated to China and Japan to become the dominant religion there. Islam spread from the Arabian Peninsula into South Asia, blending with native beliefs and leading to new faiths like Sikhism. And gunpowder made its way from China to the Middle East, forging the futures of the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal empires. In a way, the Silk Road's success led to its own demise as new maritime technologies like the magnetic compass found their way to Europe, making long land routes obsolete. Meanwhile, the collapse of Mongol rule was followed by China's withdrawal from international trade. But even though the old routes and networks did not last, they had changed the world forever, and there was no going back. Europeans seeking new maritime routes to the riches they knew awaited in East Asia led to the age of exploration and expansion into Africa and the Americas. Global interconnectedness shapes our lives like never before. Canadian shoppers buy t-shirts made in Bangladesh. Japanese audiences watch British television shows, and Tunisians use American software to launch a revolution. The impact of globalization on culture and economy is indisputable, but whatever its benefits and drawbacks, it is far from a new phenomenon. And though the mountains, deserts, and oceans that once separated us are now circumvented through supersonic vehicles, cross-continental communication cables, and signals beamed through space rather than caravans traveling for months, none of it would have been possible without the pioneering cultures whose efforts created the Silk Road, history's first World Wide Web.
Again, it's one of those things that's easy to discount. Like, who cares about trade? It doesn't matter. But you got to think about all the things it sets in motion. Again, this desire to connect with distant civilizations on the part of Europeans, and this all follows the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. Byzantine Empire falls, the Ottomans take over, they're not friendly towards the West. A lot of Indian Ocean and Silk Road trade has to funnel through their territory. So Europeans want to cut them out. So they start hitting the seas. They're not trying to find the Americans, they don't know this stuff exists. They're trying to get over here. They're trying to get to China. They're trying to get to India. The Portuguese say, we're going to sail around Africa. Columbus says, that's dumb. I can go west. I'll just pop out right over here. But you got to think about that. You just got to think about how much change that sets in motion, that desire for trade. Because once you get the European age of exploration, everything else in world history changes forever. And believe it or not, you can still see the ramifications of that. We'll get more into the Mongols next week, but just when it comes to Silk Road trade, for a while, even though Indian Ocean trade's way more economical and it's just more profitable because it's way quicker, for a while though, the Silk Road was highly revitalized because the Mongols did make it so safe and stable. Let's move on to the Indian Ocean. Sometimes the College Board will mess with you. When they ask questions about Indian Ocean trade, they'll describe this area as the Indian Ocean Basin, which is kind of confusing. I think a basin like, a water basin, something like that. All the Indian Ocean basin is, when you think Indian Ocean, it's really all of this. Well, really, when we talk about Indian Ocean trade, we're just talking about the areas near the coast. All these different civilizations that were near the coast. And looking up here, and I'd said it earlier, but let me ask you this. Of all these groups, what group do you think probably dominated this trade network the most? It's a group that's known for their emphasis on trade. Africa? Yeah, to some extent. I mean, Africa's certainly involved, and some of the people in Africa would certainly fall into this category, but I'm thinking something even broader. Muslim traders, Muslim merchants. Because again, they're here in the middle of it. And by this time, they've established a strong presence with Africa along the East Coast and the North Coast. But it even goes back to just their mentality, Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was a trader. He was a caravan merchant. There was always that great emphasis on touching other civilizations and learning about them. And if you just look at the Muslim world, I mean, it really flourishes because of trade. And because of that, you see all these little pockets, all these merchant communities develop that we call diaspora communities. If you don't have that somewhere in your notes, please get it down. Arab Muslims, you've got Chinese merchants, you've got the Malaysians, you've got the Saudians that aren't even on the list. You got a lot of different diaspora communities to form, but all a diaspora community is, it's like a large community of, I guess you could say, foreigners that kind of end up settling in a different area, along these trade routes. Again, that's why Indonesia has the largest Muslim population in the world. Muslims aren't from Indonesia, they disperse there, which is especially, I mean, that's essentially what diaspora means. Again, same sort of goods, largely luxury goods, gold, ivory, coffee, textiles, porcelain, books, luxury goods. One big thing, though, is spices, okay? Indonesia back then was known as the Spice Islands, had all sorts of exotic stuff you couldn't get anywhere, like nutmeg. But probably the biggest spice of the day, and this is wild, pepper. Kind of like salt. You're like, who cares about pepper? Does anybody know why pepper was so important back then? Not just because it kind of make your food taste a little better. No idea? This is a gross one. Probably make it throw up in your mouth a little bit. Guys, back then, did they have refrigerators? Okay. So you got all this meat laying around, and it's kind of rotten. Pepper it up. Well, that pepper taste masks the flavor of the rotten meat. I know, it's disgusting. But that's one of the things, Not only do you have to make your food taste good, sometimes these spices, such as pepper, will kind of mask the fact that it's kind of spoiled and it's not very good to eat. But again, we're looking at a different time. Again, spread of technology is going to facilitate this. We already talked about it, the compass, the astrolabe. Maritime technology is going to really facilitate this. But in the Indian Ocean specifically, there's kind of a knowledge base that starts to develop. If you don't have this down, please write it. Knowledge of monsoon winds. That's going to be really important. These monsoons are these very powerful winds that bring in powerful rains, to South Asia and some of the region. And people started to figure out, certain times of the year, these winds are blowing from the northeast. Other times they're blowing from the southwest. So if you timed your trip right, you could actually get to where you were going pretty quickly. If you didn't time it right, it was going to be dangerous and you may never get there at all. Well, once people, had those intellectual innovations, it made it easier to travel along the Indian Ocean basin. In the areas, that kind of controlled natural pit stops along the trade routes, they end up, at least for a time, becoming thriving, civilizations of their own. We talked about this, specifically when we did the South Asia and Southeast Asia reading, when we did the Africa reading. You got places like the Delhi Sultanate. This says Morocco, but it's supposed to be the Malacca Sultanate. There's like a little choke point there that if you can control it, it's where the city of Malacca is today, you can tax the traders that went there. Srivijaya, which was a group that was on the other side, not the exact same time, but they also really kind of thrived because of their control of this trade. Places like Gujarat, the Majapahit, I'm going to mess up these pronunciations, the Khmer, the Vijayanagara, the Sinhalese. We've already talked about the Swahili city-states over here in the east. We've talked about Ethiopia. These were all civilizations that really just thrived because they controlled areas where traders would have to stop. They could resupply them, they could buy and sell goods themselves, but they could also tax those traders. So again, Indian Ocean trade, I mean, once that really starts flourishing, it largely replaces the Silk Road because it is way more economical. Our next video has all to do with, what do you know, Indian Ocean trade. This is a crash course. We've watched some crash courses virtually. I don't believe we watched one in class yet. So let me kind of give you some disclaimers. Crash course, I think it's pretty good. The host is a guy named John Green. He's an author. He wrote The Fault in Our Stars and Paper Towns, maybe? People have told me in the past. I've never read any of his stuff, but he's a famous guy. Also really into history. So he came out with this show. There's 2 seasons of it. But especially season 1 goes hand in hand with a lot of the things that we study. So because, you know, it's almost designed, not exclusively for AP, but it does address some of the weird stuff that AP requires, we will watch episodes of this. He talks really, really fast. Okay, he's trying to fit a lot of information into a short amount of time. Don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to remember every single thing he says. You don't have to take notes. If you mention something that you find interesting, hey, jot that down, but don't try to keep up with them because it's going to be frustrating. Just watch it. Pay attention to it. Reflect on what you read and what you talked about yesterday as you watch it. You're going to get more out of it that way than if you're feverishly trying to write everything down. This is the longest video we're going to watch. It's like 9.5 minutes. The other 2 are really short, like one's 2 minutes, one's 3 minutes. We get through this, the longest video portion will be done. And actually, we'll be starting to wrap up. Here we go. Enjoy. Please stay awake, stay off your phones, and pay attention.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to be discussing trade here in the Indian Ocean. Oh, my globe had a globe. We're going to do some new school history today where we talk about a system instead of talking about individuals or some boring dynasty. No, Stan, not that kind of dynasty. Yes, that kind of dynasty. So many world history classes still focus on people who wore funny hats and how their antics shaped our lives, right? And while it's interesting and fun to note that, for instance, King Charles VI of France believed that he was made out of glass, relentlessly focusing on the actions of the funny-hatted people who ruled us makes us forget that we also make history. Mr. Green, did Charles VI of France really believe he was made out of glass? Yes, he did. But today we're talking about Indian Ocean trade, and it's going to be interesting, I promise, so pay attention. Also, no hats! This is a classroom, not a Truman Capote beach party. So Indian Ocean trade was like the Silk Road in that it was a network of trade routes that connected people who had stuff to people who wanted it and were willing to pay for it. And just as the Silk Road was not a single road, there were lots of Indian Ocean trade routes connecting various port cities around the Indian Ocean basin, including Zanzibar and Mogadishu and Hormuz and Canton. By the way, before you criticize my pronunciation, please remember that mispronunciation is my thing, and I've been doing it since episode 1, and nobody ever notices it's a thing! Sorry. But Indian Ocean trade was bigger, richer, and featured more diverse players than the Silk Road, but it is much less famous, probably because it does not have a snazzy name. What do you think, Stan? Like the Neptunian Network? No. The Wet Web? No, that's definitely not it. The Sexy Sea Lanes of South Asia? No, that's too hard for me to say with my list. The Monsoon Marketplace. There we go. And now the tyranny of dates. By about 700 CE, there was a recognizable monsoon marketplace, but it really blew up between 1000 CE and 1200. It then declined a bit during the Pax Mongolica when overland trade became cheap and safe, thanks to, wait for it, the Mongols. But then Indian Ocean trade surged again in the 14th and 15th centuries. So who was trading? Swahili coast cities, Islamic empires in the Middle East, India, China, Southeast Asia, and not Europe, which is probably one of the other reasons that the monsoon marketplace isn't as famous as it should be. Let's go to the thought bubble. So if you live in China and you need some ivory to make the handle for a sword, you have to trade for it because elephants only live in India and Africa. One of the reasons that Indian Ocean trade took off is that there were a wide range of resources available and a wide range of import needs, from ivory to timber to books to grain. But the most important thing was the wind. The Indian Ocean is home to a set of very special winds called monsoons. You generally hear about monsoons in the context of rain in India, but rather than thinking of monsoons as the rain itself, think of them as the wind that brings a rainy season. The great thing about seasons is that they come regularly, and so do monsoon winds. So if you were a sailor, you could count on the wind to bring you from Africa to India if you sailed between April and September, and one that would bring you back to Africa if you sailed between November and February. In fact, these winds were so predictable that early maritime travel guides often listed ideal times of departure down to the week and sometimes even the day. Predictable winds made trade a lot less risky. Like back in the day when the only power for ships were sails and oarsmen, your cargo might not arrive on time, or it might spoil, or you might die, all of which are bad for the health of global economic trade. But predictable winds meant lower risk, which meant cheaper trade, which meant more trade, which meant more people could have awesome sword handles. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Okay, there are a few more facets of Indian Ocean trade worth mentioning. First, Indian Ocean trade incorporated many more people than participated in Silk Road trade. There were Jewish people and people from Africa and Malaysia and India and China all sailing around and setting up trading communities where they would act as middlemen, trying to sell stuff for more than they bought it for and trying to find new stuff to buy that they could sell later. But despite this diversity, for the most part, especially on the western half of the Indian Ocean basin, the trade was dominated by Muslim merchants. Why? Largely because they had the money to. So as we will see, in the 15th century, the Chinese state could have changed that balance completely. By the way, I need to point out that when I say the trade was dominated by Muslim merchants, the emphasis should be on the merchants, not the Muslim or the dominated. As previously noted, we tend to think that states and governments and the funny-hatted people who rule them are the real movers and shakers in history, but that's really not the case. In the Indian Ocean, the terms of trade were set by the merchants and by the demands of the market, not by the whims of political rulers. And the self-regulating nature of that trade was remarkable and pretty much unprecedented. I mean, the most amazing thing is that, except for a few pirates, all of this trade was peaceful. For the better part of 700 years, these merchant ships were free to sail without the protection from any state's navy. This despite the fact that some pretty valuable crap was being traded. No, not bubble, I meant that colloquially. All right, we need to do the open letter before
Some of his jokes are not very good. He's gonna tell a pretty gross one here in a second.
Magic! For today's open letter, to further discuss the relationship between merchants and nobles, we're going to go inland to Kashmir, where Kota Rani was the ruler until 1339. Mostly I just love this story. But first, let's find out what's in the secret compartment. Oh, it's blowouts. Stan, are you asking me to make a diarrhea joke? Because I'm above that. I will, however, give you a party blower solo. Dear Kota Rani, so you had a pretty crazy life. First, when you were a kid, you were kidnapped by a rival noble who disguised his army as a bunch of merchants, and you were forced to marry your kidnapper, who was the ruler of Kashmir, but then you died, and you became the ruler, and you were really good at it, and everything was going awesome, and you were lining things up for your sons, but then some dude comes in and decides that he's going to marry you, and forces you to do it by attacking you. And so what do? Immediately after your second wedding, you commit suicide by slicing open your belly and offer your intestines to your horrible new husband as a wedding present. No, Stan, I don't want to say it, but I have to. That really took guts, Kota Rani. Sorry. And all this because your father welcomed an army into his house thinking they were merchants. Best wishes, John Green. So right, you wouldn't let an army or a rival noble into your house, but everyone welcomes a merchant, and not just royalty. The great thing about seaborne trade is that you can trade bulk goods like cotton cloth, foodstuffs, and timber that's all too heavy to strap onto a camel or mule. So for the first time, we see goods being traded for a mass market instead of just luxury goods like silk for elites. Wood, for instance, can be used to build houses, but it's not all that plentiful on the Arabian Peninsula. However, when it becomes cheaper thanks to trade, suddenly more people can have better houses. Much of the timber that was shipped in the monsoon marketplace came from Africa, which was kind of emblematic. Africa produced a lot of the raw materials like animal hides and skin and ivory and gold. The Swahili city-states imported finished goods such as silk and porcelain from China and cotton cloth from India. Spices and foodstuffs like rice were shipped from Southeast Asia, and especially Sri Lanka, where black pepper was a primary export. And the Islamic world provided everything from coffee to books to weapons. But it wasn't just products that made their their way around the Eastern Hemisphere thanks to the Indian Ocean. Technology spread too, like the magnetic compass, which is kind of crucial if you'd like to know where you're going, came from China. Muslim sailors popularized the astrolabe, which made it easier to navigate by the stars, and boats using stern-post rudders were easier to steer, so that technology quickly spread throughout the monsoon marketplace. The Islamic world also produced the triangular lateen sail, which became super important because it allowed ships to tack against the wind. This meant that a skilled crew could make their way through the ocean even if they didn't have a strong tailwind. And just as with the Silk Road, ideas also traveled in the monsoon marketplace. For instance, today, more Muslims live in Indonesia than in any other country. And yes, I know Indonesia has more than 2 islands. It's not to scale, obviously. Knowing what you've already learned about the growth of Islam and the spread of trade, it won't surprise you to learn that Islam spread to Indonesia via the monsoon marketplace. After the 1200s, the region, which had previously been heavily influenced by the Indian religions of Hinduism and Buddhism, like witness this temple, for instance, became increasingly Islamic as rulers and elites adopted the religion so they could have religious as well as economic ties to the people they were trading with. The conversion of most of a region to Islam, where it continues to flourish today, is a pretty big deal. But Islam didn't spread as effectively to Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, or Vietnam because they weren't centers of trade. How do you become a center of trade? Well, let's zoom in here to the Strait of Malacca. You can see how it could act as a choke point for trade. Any city that controlled that strait could stop ships from going through it, or at least tax them. And that's exactly what happened, to such an extent that a powerful merchant state called Srivijaya rose up on Sumatra. And for a while, Srivijaya dominated trade in the region because there were so many ships going through the Strait of Malacca to and from China. But, as we will see in another episode, this trade abruptly declined in the 15th century, and with it, so did Srivijaya. This brings up a key point about Indian Ocean trade, which is that it was indispensable to the creation of certain city-states like Srivijaya and the city-states of the Swahili coast. Without trade, those places wouldn't have existed, let alone become wealthy and grand. Trade was a huge source of wealth for these cities because they could tax it through import and export duties or port fees, but the fact that they are no longer powerful shows that trade can be a pretty weak foundation upon which to build a polity, even a small one. There are many reasons.
Okay, just sit down for the last minute or two. Time kind of got away from here, as it often does, so let's just go ahead and move along. Last trade network is Trans-Saharan Trade. Again, a couple of just basic things to remember. First, once again, a network largely dominated by Muslims. In the north, we've kind of seen the rise of Islam along the north coast. You know, it's still part of kind of that Arab Muslim culture region to this day. But because of trade, you started to see this faith really kind of spread to parts of Western Africa, even Central and Eastern Africa, although not so much to the east. You know, these empires that rose up, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, city-states like Hausa, the Mamluk Sultanate that kind of broke away from the Abbasids, even Ethiopia, really, you know, the cause for a lot of their success was trade. You know, controlling parts of a trade route, it allows you to tax the traders. It allows you to have access to goods. It allows you to be exposed to a lot of ideas that otherwise maybe you wouldn't. One of the vocab terms that we introduced the other day, caravanserais. We see that really along all the overland routes. And essentially all these are roadside inns spaced out, you know, near oasis, to where, you know, travelers can re-water, they can resupply. Some of these do eventually evolve into cities, but usually spaced about 100 miles apart because that's how far a camel could go. Key commodities, gold and salt. We got one more video. I'm going to skip one of them. We actually had 2, but we're going to watch one more video. And this one just kind of goes over the gold salt trade a little bit more. And then we'll wrap up real quick. I got 2 more slides to show you, but I think that we can get through those.
Hi, I'm John Green.
Maybe in a minute apiece. So we're skipping the salt mines of Mali. That's a pretty cool one. Shows just how brutal work it is to go in and get this salt. This one has a little bit more of the content that hopefully you'll be able to remember. Good? That's good.
While Europe was mired in its dark ages, Africa had several prosperous kingdoms that were flourishing due to the Sahara trade. The kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai established a network that connected Timbuktu in the west to Cairo, Egypt, and the kingdom of Kush in the north. It even stretched across the Mediterranean Sea to Italy. These wealthy African empires were rich with gold. Men dug the gold-laden soil, and women washed and separated the gold from the dirt, and the result was known as gold dust. This gold dust was secured in the hollow quills of feathers to be safely carried to markets across the vast, boiling Sahara. Camels transported caravans and they endured cruel heat, brutal sandstorms, lack of water, and robbery attempts. What may surprise you is what the African kingdoms wanted in exchange for their gold: salt. They lived in extremely hot conditions, which caused people to sweat a lot, and their bodies needed to replenish the salt that was lost through perspiration. The gold-salt trade between the Western African kingdoms and Eastern Muslim civilizations flourished for many years. In addition to gold and salt, cotton cloth, beads, copper, dates, pottery, ivory, ostrich feathers, and cola beans were carried by caravans across the desert. The ultimate impact of the trade network, though, was in a more subtle kind of swap. They exchanged customs, foods, and ideas, such as the Arabic writing system and the Islamic religion.
Okay, coming to the end here. Couple just basic things. You need to be cognizant of some of the unintended consequences. Talked about this, but if you don't have this down somewhere, you need to know. Culturally, a lot of stuff spreads. Not always stuff that people are actually trading for. Some stuff just kind of spreads inadvertently via contact. We talked about gunpowder kind of coming with the Mongol conquest. Paper, paper making technology being borrowed in the Middle East. Printing, starting with block printing. Again, maybe not something that was consciously trading, but because of these connections just kind of made their way further and further to the West. Religions, though, that's a big one. Muslim traders traveling around, throughout the trans-Saharan routes and the Silk Road routes and the Indian Ocean routes. I mean, this religion diffused widely. Buddhism, same sort of deal, went further and further to the east. Hinduism as well. We'll talk about some of these travelers, but especially once you've got printing, especially later on once you've got the printing press, the stories of Ibn Battuta and Polo and Marjorie Kemp, these are travelers that wrote about their adventures and just kind of exposed people to other ways of life. You also have environmental things. A lot of crops that had never been in the West before, because of the increased trade, started to diffuse. Bananas begin in Southeast Asia. Now you see them all over. By the really even before this period begins, you see them in Africa. You see sugar. You see citrus fruits, all really kind of diffusing because of this increased trade. But the worst thing, not that any of that's bad, disease. Again, this is the time period, and a lot of it's kind of in the aftermath of the Mongol conquest. The bubonic plague does shift further and further to the west. And that's something, you're going to see throughout history. When somewhat isolated situations and civilizations kind of come together, new diseases are introduced that people like the Europeans had never experienced. We'll see the same thing later on when Europeans arrive in the New World and bring things like smallpox. Again, trade, I know it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but these trade networks, they kind of force a lot of change moving forward. All right, and that is it. Last part of Unit 2 we got to do, we're going to talk about the Mongols Monday and Tuesday. We will give you a test review online, of course. By Monday, that'll be due the same day as the test. We'll probably work on it a little bit on Wednesday when we'll be reviewing. And then next Thursday, you do have the Unit 1 and 2 DCA. That's going to be your second major test grade. So prepare for it. If you study for it, I have no doubt you will do very well. This one's not that bad. You guys have a great day.